It's March 1st, 2023. I had taped a while back just so I could stay on pace and ground myself in what the story on the television and in some people's reality. I mean, again, it all depends on what part of the country you grew up in, I suppose. Um, for what people remember or had heard about or lived through. Um, Jimmy Carter is now in the last few days or last however long of his life. So I decided that to look back to a peanut farmer. I mean, he's the one in the White House when I arrived. So, in a time and space with where were they then and where am I now? Um, and between his time spent in the White House all the way through to where I am now and who has gone through that rigmarole, how has like the world around me necessarily changed? Not necessarily on global scale, although that has something to do with it, but more in a very nano section of New York since I'm still trapped here. Um, and then there's a headline from See the BS, which I'll flip to. There was, because apparently Jimmy Carter was best, or one of his best known, um, was Camp David Accords of 1978. I personally have not had the opportunity to go and inspect or read them, not that I can remember. Um, but in Ruler of the Realm, there was a book by Brennan. There was a CIA director at some point named Brennan. So I heard on the front face of the internet. Only CIA director I'd ever really heard of was Bush. I think now they have someone named Burns. Again, I don't know if that's like a Bible, Moses and the burning bush. Not quite sure how that correlates. The words seem to spell out indicative of something. I don't know. Um, so I'm just looking at this Jimmy Carter White House representative in the government that was here when I arrived. Since I was so young, I didn't know anything about him. Again, in the first few years, there was really no speak. I mean, Reagan was really the first president that I had heard his name, and he was the one in the Oval Office. The egg is the shape of an oval, and it was important. Um, so there's that. So I'm going to put what they've presented. I don't know who. Again, I don't know who the creators of this series called The Presidents. It was a three-part series that I call it on Story Television, which goes to the history of this area. Um, and it's some kind of docu-series, I suppose. So I'm going to put on this particular episode for some of the facts. And then there's like this, I put up earlier today on Facebook, there's this song that came up on my Pandora box by this man by the name of Eric Church. It's called Hell of a View. He sang it, apparently, I found out on YouTube, on a CMA award. That's a country music award. Again, not something that that I saw, I don't believe. Maybe I did. I just can't remember. Um, so I put that up today because it had some really interesting words about me holding you while you're holding me, kind of a thing, while painting a purple sky, whatever that means. Um, Again, like, there's in Rulers of the Realm, I'm just discovering there's Purple Palace in here. I've heard that reference once before somewhere in ancient history, in whatever. Then there's on CBS this morning, episode 43 for this year, 2023. There's this comedian that comes on and does a spoof on TikTok, and speaking up to the Chinese government with a cell phone. He looks like a relative of um, whatever was involved with hurting Judy right before she died. Just so the records are reflected on accurately. In here, I have Jimmy Carter saying that there was some conflict, but there's some peace accord in these lands, um, from 1978 with Camp David. There's a reference to that. And then there's all of these strange events that have actually happened, that are not acceptable and not all right. But I don't know who to speak to about any of this. I don't know who handles it. I have no idea the words that they use. That reality hasn't been built or constructed in like a word chart for my particular branch of family tree. Not that I'm aware of, anyhow.
An outsider, that I wasn't part of the dramatic events of the 60s. He said his name was Jimmy Carter, and he was running for president. Carter ran his campaign out of an old train depot in his hometown of Plains, Georgia. The imagery was hokey and homespun, and it worked. Number 39, Jimmy Carter, Democrat, 1977 to 1981, 52 years old, from Georgia.
Will you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me?
From the start, Jimmy Carter wanted to be a different kind of president. After taking the oath of office, he walked the inaugural parade route from the Capitol to the White House, just as Thomas Jefferson had done in 1801. Carter's family was always a visible part of his presidency. Daughter Amy had her own treehouse on the White House grounds, and hard-drinking brother Billy made headlines pitching Billy beer.
In our household, I'm not going to say the name of it, but it's a very different beer.
Jimmy Carter enjoyed softball and jogging. He was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and served in the pioneering nuclear submarine program. He was tenacious, virtuous, and smart. Raised a Southern Baptist, he was a deeply religious man whose Secret Service code name was Deacon.
He was a man of great faith, a truly good man. He said what he felt. I think he tried to do what was right by his standards, his Christian standards, in every instance. That doesn't always work in this city.
Carter was seen in Washington as something of a weirdo because people in Washington were not used to presidents with deeply sincere religious beliefs.
We're gonna meet our goal. Cut that down. 21.
Now, as a public relations filter, if I put that on my veil, I'm like, but again, I really don't know what's going on between 1977 and now. I mean, there's been so little communication.
Carter approached the job of president with the same Protestant work ethic that had served him well throughout his life. He micromanaged the White House agenda, spending long hours scouring over briefing books and memos.
Jimmy Carter digested memos like the rest of us do hot dogs or something. He scooped them up and he ate them.
For President Carter, the Oval Office would prove to be a crucible where high ideals were challenged and often withered under the heat of political realities. He found the political games of Washington unsavory, and he mostly refused to play them.
You've got to get along with those politicians. You got to get along with that House. You got to get along with that Senate. And he just didn't do it. He would not play that game.
I thought that Jimmy Carter was someone who was very idealistic, wanted to do the right thing, but I felt like he never had the kind of pragmatic political sense that you need in order to negotiate the power centers that you have to negotiate in Washington if you're going to get anything done.
Carter's political reticence handicapped his domestic initiatives, although he did change the face of the presidential cabinet, adding posts for energy and education. It was on the world scene where he truly made his mark. He will go down in history as the president who made
Energy and education. They seem more important now than ever, those two words. In something I just learned about called noetic science.
human rights central to his foreign policy.
In the past, we had gone to bed with the military dictatorships all over South America, Latin America, and Central America, and so forth. I decided that we should reverse that policy.
Without taking away anything from President Carter's real diplomatic achievements. The flip side of that coin is a certain naivete about the world. Brutal, harsh, menacing.
Now, that's why I don't really understand this travel and leisure program with some of these tech giants, where it's like open borders and just coming and going, like who's monitoring the system, who's in charge of this system, why am I being harmed in my hometown by noxious fumes, and why is my ability to move, like neuromotor function ability, why is it being crippled by things I can't even find the correct level to report to in? I know it's them. I just don't know. Is it someone from Brooklyn coming through? Is it someone in over the bridge who's coming over? I mean, they're gasoline-powered fumigation machines that, with the correct tank of neurotoxins, makes living in a metropolitan city in this much adversity really dangerous. And there doesn't seem to be a hand out giving me a hand up, but yet I'm an endangered species of human in her breeding season who's not being treated well.
In his best moments, Carter's combination of religious idealism with a tenacity of purpose yielded spectacular results. None was more important than the 1978 Camp David Accords, which Carter personally brokered between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Carter took on the role as peacemaker in the Middle East despite strong skepticism from his advisors and the American press.
And all those intelligent reporters and press people said, oh, come on, it's not going to work, Mr. President. It's, not a good idea, et cetera, et cetera. And Carter proved to be right, and we, as usual, proved to be wrong.
Surely Carter enjoyed defying the Washington establishment, but he had a higher purpose in bringing Sadat and Begin to the bargaining table.
I've been a Bible teacher since I was 18 years old. I taught Bible lessons at the Naval Academy Chapel when I was a midshipman at Annapolis.
That was amazing that when he arrived, there was still access to Naval Academy, that the parents, I don't know, do you pay for, do you have to pay to go to a Naval Academy? Is that one of the privileges of being ancestors of the presidency in this land and of the crown. I'm just, because again, I wasn't born to a family that, I mean, like, I don't even, Naval Academy, I had one uncle in something called a U.S. Navy. I don't really know if that's the same thing. Did I need to speak to Royal Navy? Would that have helped my situation? And who would our representative be exactly?
Knew the geography of the Holy Land. I knew the ancient histories and the challenges and so forth. So I had an idealistic ambition of seeing if I couldn't bring peace between Israel primarily and Egypt and address simultaneously the problems of the Palestinians.
Getting Sadat and Begin to sit down with each other was an achievement in itself, but getting them to agree on anything was a challenge of almost biblical proportions.
I found that Begin and Sadat were personally incompatible. The first 3 days, all they did was argue about ancient grievances and made ugly remarks at each other.
There's this extraordinary moment when Bacon blows up and wants to march out of the cabin and leave Maryland, and Carter puts his hands and blocks them and says, "You're not going. I'm not letting you guys leave until we get a peace accord."
It took 13 days, but finally, an exhausted President Carter persuaded Sadat and Begin to agree on a framework for peace. The signing of the Camp David Accords was the high water mark of the Carter years. Within months of that achievement, an energy and economic crisis that had been building throughout the 1970s sent Carter's approval ratings plummeting.
Does Jimmy Carter deserve the blame for the stagnant economy? Of course not. But did he do anything to exude consumer confidence? No.
There was a perception that this was a good and decent man who was in over his head.
The summer of 1979 gave birth to one of the lasting images of the Carter years: Americans waiting in long lines for gasoline. The crucible was beginning to overheat.
The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
The president intended this 1979 Oval Office address to be a national pep talk, but opponents famously dubbed it Carter's malaise speech.
Everything he was saying was very...
Now, again, if they were playing it on the television at home, I have no memory of it. I would have only been maybe one, with somewhere within my first year. So as far as a lifelong window and carry forward of what do I need to know if nobody ever brings it to my attention, Now on CBS Mornings, the year being 2023, episode 42, it has a story which they don't normally cover or air in this area or to my market. And it's called, and it shows that somewhere else what we have this Camp David 1978 Accord here in New York, but elsewhere there still seems to be some unrest, for which this is the only mention of it I've ever seen, and there's no actual words other than this one remote view.
Father and her uncle should ever have to see and do what I did that day.
The American was killed in the escalating wave of violence between Israelis and Palestinians in the West Bank.
We call on everyone to refrain from actions and rhetoric that further inflame tensions.
And Rupert Murdoch admits that some...
Then when I go to what they aired this morning, and again, that last gentleman, I don't know that podium. I don't know how to access that live or how to, it's not on my television screen. It doesn't come through on my radio. I don't know where in time and space he exists and who his target audience is and why I've been left in the lurch or the dark. I haven't been given the same access to keeping myself safe and up to date. I wouldn't even know where, like, if there's taps, like where to even tap into in order to follow that person. So it says CBS Mornings, E43. This is some, I don't know, unsavory comedy that's going on right now. I guess this is the underground market in New York. I'm not really sure. I don't really. I'm watching it, and what I do notice is the comedian is this. It looks to be pretty, like if there was a, well, what did the doctors look like that were treating Judy? It fits a broad stroke of some kind of utensil or whatever that happened here in New York just shortly before she died.
Governor Ron DeSantis launched his new book, The Courage to Be Free.
A title so politically generic that I have already forgotten it. What was it again? Oh, right. The Bravery to Be Flagged.
The White House just announced that federal agencies have 30 days to delete TikTok from all government phones.
A Chinese official is responding to this move, saying, quote, the U.S. needs to be more self-confident.
Oh, you think America isn't self-confident? We call our national champions world champions. Listen, we call dibs on the moon. That's our moon. We invaded the wrong country and stayed there for 20 years. You think I don't have the self-confidence to just mindlessly stare at my phone? I'll do it right now, China.
He looks kind of like some person, I don't know the guy's name, that's dressed in some kind of costume. It's a black jacket with some gold piping that I don't recognize. He looks like that guy who was all over the TV during the COVID thing with this unexplained virus out of nowhere. Or at least that's what the television or the public's perception was. So again, not quite sure how that's correlated or tied in, but there was some kind of aerosol, respiratory, whatever, that Judy was told to inhale. Came in these little jars that hooked to this machine. I went to go visit her. I was exposed to it. On Thanksgiving, right before she passed away, I went to go visit her to wish her a happy Thanksgiving. And I was in the room, and Bob gave her one of the treatments. I didn't know what they were. I mean, the names didn't look familiar. It smelled like one of them smelled like rotten eggs. They were to help, she said, shrink her cancer or whatever. And then shortly, I mean, like, she just, I don't know when the treatments were given, but she went from being able to walk and move around and take me out from the apartment and her driving to all of a sudden just it looked like a matter of weeks, just losing her ability to walk, and she became very frail. She wasn't able to do the things that she loved, like housework, any longer. And it was a quick deterioration and withering away. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza. And I know what hospital system was involved in that, in this local area. I went to the hospital the day she died as well.